Smokey Yunick's garage is thought to be a locked vault where dangerous NASCAR wanted to be forgotten outlaw engines and plans are kept. It turned out to be much more interesting than I thought. Smokey died of leukemia on May 9, 2001. After a public sale of everything from $5 hand tools to experimental engines that went beyond what was normally thought possible, the doors to his famous Daytona Beach workshop finally opened. In the middle of all the normal stuff were real advances that Detroit had turned down. Officials in the racing world had fought, and history almost forgot about it. When the best damn garage in town was finally open for everyone to see, what did the family and fans find? The doors were open. A few weeks after the funeral, the plain building at 957 North Beach Street in Daytona Beach wasn't used for a secret inventory by officials in masks. It had a public garage sale for several days that drew a lot of people. A lot of people came from as far away as Maine and Oregon to get a bit of racing history from what Smokey Yunick called the best damn garage in town. Smokey died at his home in Daytona Beach on May 9, 2001, after a year-long fight with leukemia. He was 77 years old. The well-known shop had been closed for years by that time. They opened in 1947, and he quickly became known as one of the smartest and most controversial mechanics in American motorsports. Then, in 1987, he shut down the business because he said there were no more good workers. The building was mostly empty until the next year, when his family started going through everything. People who went there didn't find a secret lab full of strange machines that race leaders had tried to erase. The shop looked more like it had been frozen in time than like it was still open and running. During Speed Weeks in February 2002, Margie Yunick, the widow, let everyone see what was inside. Pit tools that cost $5 were sitting next to $20 boxes that were full of race car parts. There were stacks of hubcaps and exhaust pipes, a working GMC dealership sign from the 1950s, Smokey's well-used manual typewriter, and an ad for a hand-built engine that made a very impressive claim. It had the power to go 80 miles per gallon. The price being asked was $20,000. Margie had a great closing line that said everything about the sale. The building was a mess, but it was also worth a lot of money. "We're like a junkyard, but a first-class junkyard," she said. She also talked about what Smokey would have liked. He did not want the tools and parts to be locked away in a museum. Instead, he wanted them to be used again or to be owned by fans who would treasure them as a piece of his magic. That attitude was important because Smokey had spent a lot of his life finding old machines that were no longer working and fixing them up. His family says he didn't want his life's work to be owned by wealthy collectors or turned into an exhibit that no one could touch. The money from the sale was going to go to a fund that supports new ideas in motorsports, carrying on the spirit of experimentation that had been so important to his career. Later, his daughter Trish Yunick Brown said that she was saving something much more valuable than the things themselves, even though many people wanted them. His stories. Chris Brown, her husband, called Smokey NASCAR's wildest cheater, which is a term that race fans knew right away. It wasn't meant to be rude. It showed a man who was always finding gaps in the law that made rule books change. It couldn't have been more different from the tales. There were no midnight NASCAR raids or hidden government seizures at the Great Unveiling. Instead, there was a public sale where regular fans could buy everyday tools along with amazing inventions. Even after the land was sold in 2003 and the last building was destroyed by fire on April 25, 2011, the real heritage was already spread across the country in garages, workshops, and collections. Would you have driven all the way across the country to get Smokey's $5 hammer? Or were you waiting for that engine that was said to get 80 miles per gallon? Along with the hammers and hubcaps, there were engines and other unusual or leftover parts. One said it would get 80 miles per gallon. Others were even more bold. They were prototypes that engineers in Detroit had tested, confirmed, and then quit on. If the public sale showed that the garage was never a secret place, what tools were still there that were performing decades ahead of their time? The hot vapor engines that made it through. Some of the things that were for sale were the engines that showed Smokey had figured out the hot vapor cycle, which even Detroit's best experts had missed. The family kept these engines. Modern cars use computers to control fuel, but Smokey used a 2.5L Pontiac Fiero Iron Duke 4-cylinder that had been changed in a different way. The stock model had about 90 horsepower and got 35 miles per gallon on the highway. Smokey's carbureted version had 250 horsepower and 250 pound-feet of torque. It sped up from 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 6.5 seconds and got 51 miles per gallon on 93-octane gas. A process called adiabatic burning is what he used to do this. He didn't cool the mixture of air and fuel. Instead, he boiled it with waste heat from the exhaust and coolant. The mixture went through a homogenizer, which is an exhaust-driven turbine under the carburetor. It then went through a wrapped manifold and heated up to over 450 degrees Fahrenheit. This turned the fuel into vapor, which let the engine run with a very low air-to-fuel ratio of more than 20 to 1. These amazing performance numbers were checked by Detroit Labs and original equipment engineers, who confirmed that the engine met strict emission standards from the 1980s without using a computer at all. Ralph Johnson, a Holley carburetor expert and General Motors dyno mechanic who worked with Smokey in the 1950s, came up with the main idea. The two of them worked together to go past the normal detonation threshold. To keep the hydrogen burn under control, they kept the exhaust temperatures around 2,250 degrees. The car never ran as well as it did just before it let go. Johnson later said about their lean burn tuning. A 3-cylinder Buick, a Ford, and a Dodge Omni were among the hot vapor prototypes they made. Each of these test cars got more than 45 miles per gallon and almost 2 horsepower per cubic inch. Production almost didn't happen at all times, like with the S10 truck project and the license deal with Crane Cams. The technology failed in the end because people were worried about how long it would last, the cost of making it, the lawyers' fees, and the industry's not invented here syndrome. But the real engines lived on. 4 of them were kept by his daughter Trish. Tony Allers, an enthusiast, finally bought the running examples and used the salvaged original drivetrain to build a beautifully restored Fiero replica that he drove every day for years. Allers gave that car to the Don Garlits Museum of Drag Racing for Christmas 2009, where it is now on display. Another unit is said to be at the Smithsonian. When it came out in the 1980s, a carbureted 2.5L 4-cylinder could get 250 horsepower and 51 miles per gallon while still meeting emission standards. So why did Detroit kill it? The crown jewels that lived on after he died were the hot vapor engines. But Smokey wasn't done with his progress yet. He got patents for fuel conditioning, oil systems, engine testing, and even a crash barrier. These patents show ideas that the racing world often didn't accept until many years later. The patent list showed how he tried to move the industry forward in a planned way, while the prototypes showed what he built behind closed doors. Just what did those patents cover? Which ones did Detroit seem to be most interested in? They tried to hide the patents and ideas. The patent office kept records of everything Smokey wouldn't let die quietly, but some of the hot vapor secrets went to the grave with them. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office records show that he got at least 9 patents between 1978 and 1996. Patents are basically legal proof of when an idea was first thought of. They show a man who was actively trying to solve problems long before the establishment was ready to do so. These papers from his study on hot vapor engines show that the tests he did in his garage were based on real engineering drawings. He got a lot of inventions between 1984 and 1988. These describe the exact tools, how to use them, and fuel treatment systems for the Fiero's internal combustion engines. Around 2003, these papers were made public so that anyone could study the technology for free. In 1970,000, $4,035,000 for a pressure vent. In 1991, he got patent $5,248,866 for an oil change system. And in 1994, he got patent $5,515,012 for ways to test engines. But safety and aerodynamics were the things that made his fights with governing bodies the most frustrating. In 1961, he came up with pneumatic air jacks that could instantly lift stock cars during pit stops. However, NASCAR said they weren't right for the series and didn't use them. For the Indy 500 the next year, he put a huge wing over Jim Rathman's Simone's Vista Special Watson Roadster engine. It had downforce that had never been seen before and great turning speed, but it had too much drag on the straightaways, so the U.S. Auto Club quickly banned it anyway. A few decades later, wings were required in all Can-Am, Formula One, and IndyCar races. Safety barriers caused the longest and darkest wait. In the early 1980s, long before the modern safer barrier appeared, Smokey came up with the idea of a simple soft wall made of old tires squished between heavy plywood sheets to absorb impacts. At the time, NASCAR didn't use it, so cars had to deal with solid concrete walls. He finally made his safety study official by getting patent $5,645,068 in 1996, which described a racetrack with a new crash barrier. What number of lives could have been saved if NASCAR had used Smokey's idea of a tire wall barrier in the early 1980s instead of waiting decades for safer barriers? Patents and safety gear that was turned down showed the pattern. Smokey found solutions to problems that the system and the rules weren't ready for. That was most clear in the cars that made NASCAR have to make new rules. The famous 7/8 scale Chevelle wasn't a small toy. The inspection book was still changed by something more subtle and powerful. But what did Smokey's measures and writings really say about those Chevelles? The Chevy Chevelle that made the templates work. The picture of Smokey with his cigar and crooked grin next to his Chevelle is still around. It is generally labeled as the 7/8 scale car that made NASCAR change the rules, except that the measures bust the myth about the scale model. A real 7/8 scale car would have been almost 10 inches smaller, over 2 feet shorter, and the wheels would have been 100 inches apart. Any person walking by in the garage would have seen it right away. Instead, the truth was about 3 Chevelles with bodies from 1966, which are often mistakenly called 1967 models. Chevrolet engineering did a lot of work on the base, and Smokey finished it off with great care. The real changes were great changes to the aerodynamics. To make the weight balance better, he moved the body about 2 inches backward on the chassis. To control airflow under the car, he raised and smoothed the floor pan, lowered the roof and windows slightly, raked the windshield back, and changed the fenders and drip rails. The front bumper was even cut into sections, which made it higher and better at reducing drag. The sheet metal stayed mostly the same, but the shape was changed to cut the air. When going over 180 miles per hour, these small changes in aerodynamics make a huge difference. When NASCAR officials saw that something wasn't right, they used Bobby Johns' wrecked Chevelle as a model to make their first templates. This created huge issues during inspections, which is why NASCAR finally made the whole field use the same roof, hood, and trunk templates. It was a perfect engineering job. Curtis Turner was the first person to qualify at Daytona at over 180 miles per hour in one of these cars. In a 1987 piece in Circle Track magazine and later in his autobiography, Smokey directly denied the rumor that he was a pure-scale model. He said that the changes he made were much more planned. He tended to live in the gray areas of the rules, and this fit with that. He reportedly took advantage of limits on fuel capacity by using 11-foot coils of 2-inch tubing for his fuel line. This added about 5 gallons of fuel to the car. There are a lot of stories about cars that were inspected and found to have off-center chassis and empty tanks. Later, Smokey wrote about his strategies. He thought the other guys were cheating 10 times worse than us, so it was just self-defense. Chevelle's and gray area strategies showed that people could think like they were in their own garages, but not a car or a property was the most personal thing that was left behind. Smokey's own voice could be heard on more than 1,000 pages. His family released the autobiography he finished right before he died. It showed a man who was both happy and alone. What did those pages show about the terrible accident that Fireball Roberts was in and why he quit NASCAR? Fans took hammers away, and prototypes were sent to new homes or museums. Smokey wrote the autobiography, which is the most full record of his thoughts. He finished it as his leukemia got worse. There isn't a video that looks like that 100-page book that was found in the garage on iTunes. It came out as a huge 3-volume box set called Best Damn Garage in Town. The set was self-published after his death in 2001 by Carbon Press and his family. It had over 400 photos and was split into volumes that talked about his life, driving stock cars, and his entries and inventions in the Indy 500. John DeLorean even read the book aloud. This is the real, raw voice that takes the place of the made-up letters that were never sent that modern writers often use. The pages talk about the terrible accident that made him quit racing stock cars. In 1964, his close friend Fireball Roberts drove off the road and caught fire at Charlotte. He died 40 days later from his injuries. The loss made Smokey start a tough safety campaign. When NASCAR founder Bill France Sr. repeatedly turned down Smokey's ideas for safer fuel cells, he quit the organization for good around 1970. His military experience is also talked about in the autobiography, which shows an interesting conflict between memory and official records. Some people, including Smokey, said they flew more than 50 missions in a B-17 bomber. However, papers from the National Archives show that he was drafted in 1943 as a welder and served from 1944 to 1946. But the military confirmed that he was promoted to second lieutenant and given an air medal while serving with the 15th Air Force. This showed that his service was still highly decorated. His proven track record in races was also impossible to dispute. As an owner and crew chief, he won 2 championships in 57 Cup Series races. As a master mechanic, he won the 1960 Indy 500. In 1961 and 1962, he was the first owner to win 2 Daytona 500s. In the end, he was inducted into more than 30 Halls of Fame. In 1990, he was inducted into the International Motorsports Hall of Fame, and in 2000, he was inducted into the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America. If the death of Fireball Roberts in 1964 made Smokey a criminal who fought for safety, but NASCAR's owner repeatedly stopped him, does that change how you read about him in other crime stories? The real inventory is made up of the book, the patents, the engines that are still running, and the public sell. However, the garage's last story is a bittersweet one. As planned by the owners, the house was sold in 2003. Most of the buildings were carefully taken down, and on April 25, 2011, a fire burned the last one that was still standing. The charity funded by the sale, the machines that are still working, and the undeniable proof that one stubborn mind kept the sport honest by always outthinking it are what will last. How should the racing world really remember the man whose old cars still do better than the legends? The foundation, the machines, and the new rules that he wrote. On April 25, 2011, the last building on the old garage property caught fire. The best garage in town was no longer there, but everything important had already gotten away. The things in Smokey's famous shop were sold or auctioned off during a big public event in 2002, just as he had asked. The money raised went to a foundation whose goal is to support new ideas in racing. He chose this road on purpose because he didn't want his family to have to take care of an expensive archive or for wealthy people funding a private museum to control his legacy. The land itself was sold in 2003 and most of the original buildings were later razed. Around 7 p.m. that April evening, the last building that was still standing was destroyed by fire. But the most important things he did in his life are still around. The hot vapor Fiero that Tony Allers drove is still in the Don Garlits Museum of Drag Racing. Allers gave it to the museum on Christmas 2009, which is fitting since Smokey once said that Garlits' early museum problems were a reason he shouldn't build his own. God 4 test engines are still kept by his family. The hot vapor Dodge Horizon is owned by a collector who has a signed bill of sale for it. Allers, on the other hand, keeps the original garage tools and even a shop door. It is said that the Smithsonian Institution has borrowed another test engine for a long time. Over 30 different racing halls of fame have a lot of information about him. Hats, pipes, and original garage tools are safely stored in cases all over the country. His most lasting legacies, though, are the rules he changed for the sport. Every standard body shape in NASCAR today has its roots in that slightly off-center Chevelle. His aerodynamic wings and pneumatic air jacks were ahead of their time by decades, and other major racing series now require them as standard. Even his simple idea for a tire wall safety system laid the intellectual groundwork for the modern barriers that keep cars safer and save lives today. His patents on hot air are now in the public domain, but engineers are still studying them to find ways to make heat use more efficient. The real inventory they found after he died is much more amazing than the made-up vault drama that was made for clicks online. The hot vapor Fiero is still on display and making its original numbers. The patents are in the public domain. What part of Smokey's unfinished business do you wish the industry had finished the most? There is no longer a garage. Myths keep getting bigger. But the things that were taken away in 2002, the sales records, the running prototypes, the patent numbers, the 100-page book, and the rulebook pages that he had rewritten, make it clear who Smokey Yunick really was. No one could say what they saw in Smokey Yunick's garage after he died. Why? Because the 250 horsepower, 51 miles per gallon hot vapor engines, the public patents, and his 1,100-page book showed he was right the whole time. What proof do you think makes his story stronger?